As part of their enduring commitment to justice, equity, and expression, the Open Society Foundations are proud to sponsor Many Lumens. You're listening to Many Lumens, where we talk about and find meaning in the intersections of art, social change, and popular culture. I'm your host, Maori Karmael Holmes. For this episode, I have the pleasure of being joined by my old friend and kindred spirit, Jeff Chang. Like me, Jeff did his time in the music industry as a DJ and as one of the co-founders of Soulside Records. He's worked as an activist and organizer, and of course, he's a writer. In 2005, his first book, the seminal Can't Stop, Won't Stop, was released, with a YA edition co-authored by Davey D, published in 2021. Jeff has written 3 other books, Total Chaos, Who We Be, and We Gon' Be Alright, the latter of which was adapted into a limited nonfiction series by director Bao Nguyen. In our conversation, we time travel back to the 80s and 90s, looking at how hip-hop transformed our politics and shaped our outlook on the world. We examine the learnings of failure, what it means to move forward, and how our chosen family can become some of our most crucial systems of support. I also talked to Jeff about his prolific writing practice, Black and Asian solidarity, and what it was like to grow up in Hawaii. I think we met like in 2007 or so when I was managing Tariq. I think that was the first time. And Il Weaver introduced us to work on Tariq's book. And I had already taught Can't Stop, Won't Stop. So I was like super excited. You were a hero to me. You still are. And one of the things that I just feel like has been so great is that I felt like I met this kindred spirit who had done like all these different careers and still continued to do so, you know. I had been trying to like settle on one thing. And then I was like, oh, I can be Jeff. I can keep doing like everything. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, your journey? You know, you've worked in the music business, you've worked as an organizer, you've worked in nonprofit social justice, you know, you've co-founded all of these things. Like, what's the elevator version of your career?
Oh, wow. You're asking me for that? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't really feel like I've had a career. I feel like I've just sort of had interests, and I've been lucky enough to have an amazing partner who she lets me do everything and has a lot of patience with me. And so I went to school here on the West Coast. Me and Dave were around doing the same thing, the same time and stuff, and got involved in activism and community organizing. Got sent to DC in the first summer of my community organizing to go work on what became Justice for Janitors in DC. And that was like, wow, that summer was amazing because I was getting inducted into what it meant to be an organizer. And then at night, because we would have these really long hours, those are the days when like there were no breaks and things, right? Like you'd be up and you'd be working like 11 or 12 noon maybe because, you know, you're working organizing hours. And then you'd be waiting for the workers to get out of their jobs, of the buildings. And so after that, we'd always be like, we're going clubbing. So that was the summer of like 87, I think. Fast forwarding, I thought I was headed for a career in politics, burnt out on that super fast. And while I was working in the state capitol in Sacramento, was like, this is killing me. I need to do something about it. So I went and talked my way into getting a position or a DJ slot at KDVS, which is at the University of California, Davis. And there I got to meet all these guys. Then we formed a crew. It's called Quantum now. But it included like Black Alicious. It included DJ Shadow, included Lyrics Born, Latif the True Speaker. And we were deeply involved in like that sort of independent West Coast hip hop scene that kind of got germinated by Freestyle Fellowship. And that like continues on with like Stone's Throw Records and Dan the Automator and of course my crew, and Hieroglyphics, of course, were our contemporaries. And so did that for a while. And then I went back to the folks who had trained me in organizing. They had formed a think tank, and we started up a magazine called Color Lines. At that time, I started writing for the Village Voice, which was totally a dream. Like I had discovered Greg Tate and Bob Christgau as a teenager in Hawaii. because they'd get like a couple copies of the Village Voice, and I was so into hip hop, I was trying to find all the things I could find out about hip hop. So the Village Voice, I would like go to the store so I could read it, and that was like part of what I wanted to do, was my dream. So I went back into writing and got to write for a bunch of hip hop magazines. Got trained by the best, by people like Sheena Lester, who has deep roots in Philly, of course, Danielle Smith, Sue Cummings was one of my first editors. Eventually got to be like edited by Bob Christgau, and like developed that, and eventually went to go work for, I'm giving you a long version, I should shorten this, but I went to go work for Russell Simmons at 360 Hip Hop during the first .com phase. And then when that imploded, which is a whole other story, started writing Can't Stop, Won't Stop. And that's pretty much the path that I'd taken through my 20s, I suppose. And I've just been writing since, writing, and I've taught, and I'm working a lot on narrative strategy and cultural strategy now. Yeah, and I've just continued to stay like right around that center of where culture meets mass movement change type vibe. So that's sort of it. Yeah.
And so we were talking a little bit before we started, and you haven't been to the East Coast since the pandemic has been on. And how is that? Because I feel like New York is such a part of your, like cultural background. How is it feeling?
Yeah, it's really strange. I have so many friends who live in New York still, and family that lives there as well. I do miss it a lot. And it was weird too, because our young adult version of Can't Stop, Won't Stop came out last March, actually on March 16th, which, of course, for those of us who are Asian American Pacific Islander, it's like it's going to be one of those days etched into our minds forever. And so we wrote the book, Davey D and I wrote this version of the book together. And there were times when it was kind of like, wow, like, would it have been great if we were just able to go and talk to these folks, go to the Bronx and, kind of get the whole vibe of it again and all of that. So, like being able to engage, especially younger folks around it and that kind of thing, we really missed that.
Yeah.
We really, really missed that.
Well, sort of speaking of Can't Stop, Won't Stop, which is the young adult book that you're talking about, I'd love to ask you about your coming of age during the golden age.
Okay.
And I was just listening to, the team did, a lot of research and pulled up an interview you did with Adrian Young last year. But, you said hip hop has been the biggest teacher in your life. And so I just wanted to ask you, how? How, Sway?
I just feel like everything that I've gotten into, I've learned through hip hop. First of all, just a sort of expansive vision of Black freedom that is encapsulated in the music. Like even after college, and even after being a hip hop DJ on the radio, even after having our label, our record label, Soul Sides, like I never really could put my finger on how hip hop shaped everything from my politics to the way I see the world to like even ideas and visions of like what democracy can be and all that. Like all of that was embedded in the music. So not just the music, but the culture, right? The visual arts, the dance, even though I was never really a dancer, all of those kinds of things.
I want to see B-Boy JC.
No, not at all. I'm like MC8, like we don't dance, like that's not what we do. Yeah. So, like even coming into community organizing and all these different types of things, it was all shaped by this notion of being able to connect and making sense of the world. So my older cousins had kind of come up on like folk rock and that kind of music during that particular era in Hawaii merged with a lot of the Hawaiian Renaissance. So they were really putting into that music a lot of the feeling of what it meant to be authentic and Hawaiian and, rural and back to the land and that kind of stuff. And in Hawaii, they have what they call town and they have country. And I grew up like in a suburb right in the middle of it. Right. So, but that was like a romantic type of thing for a lot of us, looking up to our older siblings, cousins, all that kind of stuff, and hearing what they were about and seeing what they were about. And then for us, when we came of age, it was like after this period of huge development and this massive expansion of investment from Japan and from the US, I just remember being mad at concrete, like, what's all this concrete coming up? And so for like me to see
the message,
Wild Style, the message or Wild Style was like, oh, I could take a spray can, and it wasn't necessarily political, but it was like, it was the type of thing where I could say, oh, now I've got language to be able to express what I'm angry about, which I didn't really understand. And so being, pulled in by Black freedom music, Black freedom culture takes you inevitably to the Black freedom movement. So that was sort of my education process in a nutshell, I guess.
No, I mean, thank you for saying that. It's, I'm thinking about, and I don't know what is true for generations after, and I put myself in your generation, even though I'm at the end of it, but you're just trying
to remind me how old I am.
No. I mean, I've been talking to a friend who's just a little bit younger, but he's like definitely a millennial, where I'm like on the border. And, I think to like wherever you are, what I feel like when you're about between 12 and 15 years old, the music that comes at that moment, like it gets in your heart in a certain kind of way. And I'm so fortunate that was Tribe, and that was like all of like native tongues and all of that was that moment.
I'm laughing because for my kids, it's Kanye.
Right. Well, I think that's really sad.
I'm like, Kanye's so foul now. And they're like, yeah, but he's always going to be the GOAT. And I'm like, okay.
Well, I think I think that's exactly the point. I mean, it's so fascinating because this particular friend grew up religious, so also didn't listen to hip hop. So what for him, it wouldn't have been Kanye, but it might have been like, I don't know, Nelly or something, like it was just a little bit earlier. But he came to Tribe, or he came to Q-Tip with like Vibrant Thing. And so like that's his favorite song. And I was like, it couldn't be like, so opposite. But, and I think again, for those of us into hip hop in the 80s and 90s, that it wasn't just about music. Like it really was a transformative culture. And I think about people making decisions about their religion, about their relationships, about how they were going to eat. So many people became politicized. It's like between Malcolm X coming out and, KRS-One, the number of folks who became Muslim, who started kind of discovering like African culture generally or other, third world culture broadly. I think about like how important it was. And so when people say like hip hop is culture, I think for younger folks, it's so distanced from all of that, right? Like, you might think Megan Thee Stallion is an incredible lyricist, but you're not like looking to her for like lifestyle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think folks do though, don't you?
I don't know. And maybe because I don't have young people in my life like that. So that does make me old.
Well, I'm not on the front line anymore. Like when I was like teaching and stuff and, and running this arts institute. Yeah. Like you could see the culture kind of changing before your eyes. And what's happened recently, what's like so prominent that you can't mistake it, right? Is like even like older folks. I was just talking to Ishmael Reed about this of all people yesterday, but is this shift around gender and ideas about gender in hip hop, right? And that the artists who are the most exciting in the moment are like women or queer, right? Or both, right? Mm-hmm. Or like, like femme, I should say femme and queer. And that is like a huge, massive shift. And I guess what I'm saying is you can kind of see it coming as taste shifted, how that would translate into clothes, into art making, into just the way they hung out and hang out. And even thinking about now, like, talking with friends and, their kids like feeling okay to be able to come out at the age of 5 or 6. You know what I mean? Just how dramatic that shift is from when we were coming up and Byron had to put out Beyond Fates and Rhymes and really like sort of put it out there for us to kind of have this, mass conversation about toxic masculinity, as if like, Tupac and Biggie like weren't enough for us to make that happen, and all the other kinds of things that came along with that Black feminists were at the forefront of from the very beginning.
Another in the research, one of the things that I also saw that you said, and I was curious about this because it's something that I struggle with, that of all the things you've done, you keep coming back to writing because it is difficult, but it brings you the most joy. It is the thing I put off the most, like it is the hardest thing to do. And I was curious for you, like, where do you find the metal to push yourself, because I avoid it, even though I love it. I mean, even with Scene, I wanted to contribute more to it. And I did 2 interviews for our first 2 issues, but I was late with those. You know what I mean? Like, it was just, I have all these ideas.
When you're the publisher.
You shouldn't though, And I feel like conversations that we've had, you've been like, where's your book, May?
Yeah, totally.
But tell me, like, where do I find the strength?
I don't know. I mean, it's the hardest thing that I do, and it's the most rewarding thing I do. Maybe there's a little bit of that, like chasing the high of it, right? Like sort of the other day I had a really good day of writing and I just felt so good. We're preparing for an event. And so like the first thing to go is writing time, right? When you're preparing for something. And it's literally like I've structured myself now to where like I'm only supposed to be working on this job part-time and I'm supposed to have all the rest of the time for writing. And of course, the last 3 weeks, as we've geared up for this launch, the writing time has kind of shrunk. Luckily, my team is all like 20 and 30-year-olds who are like really understanding, like in a way that we would never have been of like, boundaries, like, of course, you know what I mean? But like when I had the full-time job at Stanford and I had to commute 4 hours, I would literally like round trip, right? I would literally get up at 4 a.m. and work for 2 hours every morning. But it was good because it was kind of like a meditation. Mm-hmm. And so like 2 books came out of that style of working on weekends and that kind of stuff.
Every serious writer I know has that kind of schedule. Like when I've talked to Jason Reynolds and Sonia Sanchez and Lorene Carey, and they all are like, I write at 4 a.m. or 6 a.m., whatever the time is, because Sonia was, her most prolific having twins and a full-time teaching job. Wow. And she was like, I got up at 3:30 and I wrote every day.
Wow.
And I mean, she's like Virgo and like super disciplined, but I don't think that was easy for her. It was just necessary,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't think there's like a mystical thing of like, oh, I want to do this so badly or blah, 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 blah. I think like part of it is just the rational thing of like scheduling it. And then like anything else, it's the showing up and stuff, like I don't necessarily have great writing days, even when I got everything cleared and there's nothing else going on. Some days are great. And some days are just like really hard work.
You're in Berkeley, so you probably know this, but what's your rising?
What's my because I'm in Berkeley?
Yeah.
No, it's because I have a millennial staff is why, and a Gen Z staff. My rising is Gemini.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's your Venus?
Oh, I don't know what my Venus is.
Oh, okay.
I know. I think my moon is Taurus and my rising is Gemini.
Oh, I love it. Your moon is in Taurus.
Yeah.
I was asking because my Venus is in Gemini, and
what does that mean?
One of my friends, there's a book I can send it to you afterward that talks about your creative endeavors, and it's based on Venus and Mars, and Venus and Gemini, because Gemini, as you know, our communications and, often like have multiple sides. Venus is supposed to be about romance, but for me, it's shown up as like kind of like avocation, And so I feel like the reason I'm attracted to so many different projects is that it's like this bright, shiny thing. And so similarly to you, it's like, oh, I'm interested in this. I'm going to go over here. I'm interested in that. I want to go over here. And it isn't at all. It's actually a wiring. It's not really disorganized. It's like organized confusion, right? It's like you got to go in these different ways because of the way you're wired. And so I wonder if your rising contributes to that for you.
Yeah, I think probably it really does, for sure. Yeah, you're definitely singing my song. That's also a process. Like my process too is, the best way to describe it is iterative. That's like a nice way to describe it. A poor way to describe it would be like, whatever, attention deficit or whatever. Shiny thing, right? Like you said.
But it's not really attention deficit disorder for you because you finish the things you start. And I also don't think there's anything wrong with trying out a thing and walking away,
Yes,
so often we like hold on to things when it was meant to be a project or it was meant for someone else to run or, so I feel like that's a good thing.
Can I just put a pin in that? One of the things that I think I've learned too is it's okay to fail. It's okay to try stuff and really like not have it work out the way that you wanted it to.
Yeah.
And there are all the feelings that kind of go along with it and stuff. But it's a thing where it's like, oh, cool. Like you're still going to take away the learnings from it. The worst thing to take away from a so-called failure would be like not to try again. Not to actually exercise the knowledge that you actually gained from that particular process. So I just wrote a screenplay, a couple screenplays, and it just didn't work. Like the first one was not good. The second one was not bad, but it wasn't great, and I'm a little heartbroken about it because it was a story that I really, really wanted to tell. So I'm just going to like keep on walking and just like continue in learning about how to write this better.
I'm going to shift direction a little bit and ask you about you and Lourdes because you've been together for 1,000 years. And I would just like, can you talk a bit about how you met and how she's shaped your politics and your approach to your work?
Yeah, no, she and I met at Cal in college. Like, I remember distinctly seeing her in my freshman year, hanging out with another mutual friend of ours and telling my mutual friend, like, hey, can you introduce me to more of your friends, like right in front of her? And she was so turned off. She told me this later. But I was just like, wow, like, you're fine. I want to get with you. And the reason that that summer of '87 was so amazing was not just this whole like mind-blowing, like visceral experience, but I came back that summer and that's when we actually like started hanging out a little bit. And by the fall we were dating and stuff. So yeah, we've been together forever. It's really true. And I've been really lucky in that during the periods where, well, I'll put it this way. I've taken a lot of risks in my so-called career that would not have been possible had we not been together. A, for her encouraging me, and B, for her like saying, all right, I'll hold it down now. I'll expect you to be holding it down in a minute, that kind of thing. And there's been that exchange. But I think the deepest thing about it is, and I can't say this without sounding a little bit corny or cheesy, but when you're in a really deep relationship with somebody, it actually allows you to be able to be more expansive and generous in the way that you see the world in all the ways. It makes you more open to be able to see the world in different kinds of ways. And I know that you've experienced this as well. Yeah. So I owe everything to her, really. I absolutely do. She's always been the person to be like, all right, that's enough. Like if I'm being too ideological or if I'm being too argumentative or I'm, this or that and stuff, like, okay. Yeah. And that's grounding because it's just a basic check. And all of that comes out of like, look, dude, if you're going to live here with me, nah. No, you're not going to act like that. And that's real, So yeah, that's part of the loving relationship that we've had.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Thank you for letting me ask that.
Of course.
Some other impressive friends whose children pretend to not be interested in their work. And then once the children are in their early 20s, we kind of discover they've been taking notes. And I was wondering if you found this to be the case with your sons. Have they shown an interest in your world?
It's really, man, I might cry, but it's like, it's been really, really beautiful to kind of see them flower into their own voices, and into their own spirits and souls as creative folks, as like human beings and that kind of thing. And one's a filmmaker, one's a rapper, and one's a musician, I should say. And they've been working on this major project, over the last year and a half or so. And in this particular process, they didn't tell me and Lourdes that they were going to go out and start doing all these different types of things, like getting a producer and like hiring people and developing a budget and like putting together pitch decks and, and then like hiring a cast and crew of, their peers and like going all out and stuff and doing all these things. And they'll probably kill me for saying this, actually, for having this out there in the world. But then I won't tell them that this podcast is out. I remember like we had one night where, I was trying to be gentle. I was trying to be like very supportive and very understanding. But, one night we were having this discussion and it was about a pitch deck that they had put together to kind of like take to folks, gain interest, raise funds, do whatever they needed to do. And I was like, I know how to tell them how to make this pitch deck better. And so in the middle of our conversation, I was like, well, why don't you guys just pitch me? Like, show me your deck, pitch me. So like half an hour later, they called back. We went through it all. And I was like as gentle as possible as I could be and gave them some suggestions, but it was never like directive. And then I got these long texts from each of them about how hard it was for them to actually do that with me, and then like, here's a part where I have to prevent myself from crying on this podcast. But it was one of those things that was really powerful because like you said, they had been taking notes all along, but it was also this type of moment where it was like, acknowledging how I'm learning from them and them what they've kind of learned from me. And it was this beautiful thing of now we both actually kind of feel released to be in a different kind of relationship with each other. So that was really powerful. That was a really major moment for me. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for asking. Nobody's ever asked me that.
Oh, this next one I want to ask, and you can also say no because it also might make you cry. But I just wanted you to, reflect on your father and when you were growing up, sort of what you thought you wanted to do and if he understood your sort of relationship to all of the work that you've done and how he sort of encouraged you or maybe didn't, but just if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, my dad, wow. I don't think my dad ever understood what I was doing. I actually don't think that he ever really did. Like, I'm actually looking at a picture of him right now and he's smiling at me like, ha, yeah. And I know that actually because, I'd have to be like, yeah, Dad, I'm not going to continue in politics. I'm going to go get a degree. In what? In Asian American studies, you know what I mean? And in ethnic studies, like, oh, what's that? And then me saying, yeah, I can become a professor. It's a stable job, classic stuff. When I was writing and that kind of thing, it was like he wasn't really checking for that. And then I'm like, yeah, Dad, I'm not gonna go and get my PhD anymore. I'm gonna run this record label. And he's like, oh, okay. What do you mean? Well, I'm trying to be an entrepreneur, Dad. Like, we've got all these great artists and we're on the edge of something big. And, we've got these deals in hand from overseas companies. All this is true. So I'm going to make a go of it. And then, oh, Dad, like the record label thing didn't work out. I'm going to go back to writing. They're going to hire me to write. Oh, they're going to hire you to write now. Okay. I don't think he really understood, but he didn't nag or judge or that kind of stuff. I mean, he probably judged, but I'm sure he was talking to Mom and the other folks and like trying to find ways to do it. But I remember many, many years later, they had like when he was getting ready to retire, they did an interview with him. And they asked him the same kinds of questions that you're asking me, like about his family, and about his relationship with his kids and stuff. And he talked about how proud he was of all of us. And he's like, yeah, like my son, he's a writer. And he went to go interview Obama and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, okay. Maybe you see me. But the thing is he never laid down ultimatums or anything like that.
What did he do?
I think that at some point he's probably just like, that's my headstrong son. And he's gonna do what he's gonna do, And I remember a conversation that we had, I think it was probably in my late 20s. And this was just after the record label thing had not worked out. And I was kind of at a bottom. And, I didn't know what I was going to do. And he looked at me and he was like, you know what? You're going to be fine. He's like, everybody goes through things, but he's like, just have faith. And just for him to even say that at that particular moment, after like me justifying this and justifying that for all these years, it was pretty powerful. It was what I needed to hear. And I think that's something that lingers with me in terms of like my relationship with my kids. Just reminding them like, you got all these qualities, you got all these skills, what you might not have right now is like the sight to see where you're going to be in 5 years or 10 years. Nobody has that really, but just believe and it'll be all right. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Fuck.
I just remember, I think when you got hired at Stanford, you said he was like, oh, you have a job. Like he like got it. He was like, yes. Yes.
I totally remember that. Yeah. You're like, what? You have a real job now? Yeah.
Scene is a journal of film and visual culture focused on Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities globally. With essays, reviews, interviews, and more from critics, artists, and other luminaries of color, it's the publication Harper's Bazaar calls a must-read for anyone with a serious film interest. Subscribe at scene.blackstarfest.org. You're listening to Many Lumens. Now back to my interview with Jeff Chang. We're going to switch again. I want to ask you about the May 19th project, and just if you could tell us a little bit more about it. I know that it's inspired by Yuri Kochiyama and Malcolm X's shared birthday. Shout out to Tauruses.
Yes.
But yeah, could you talk a little bit about just for if anyone doesn't know, the genesis of the project and what it's doing?
Yeah. Last May, actually even before March 16th, have been talking about the rising violence against Asian Americans. And what we began to notice, especially after Biden got elected, is that the narrative started to change about anti-Asian violence. What you saw was media, especially in the big cities, doing the same thing that they had done in the early 1990s in Los Angeles, which was running these videos over and over again of these acts of violence that, were polarizing. And in this particular instance, it was of incidents in which Asian Americans had been harmed, attacked, and the perpetrators were Black or brown. What we know and knew back then was the overwhelming amount of violence that's directed at Asian Americans is from whites. But it's possible to play a video of a Black person, say, kicking an Asian grandma, play that 1,000,000 times, have that amplified through social media, and have it be seen 10 million times more, and that will become the narrative. And there's already a narrative that fit that, right? That had been developed around the late 80s and the early 90s, which is that Blacks and Asian Americans are never going to get along, which belies, again, the truth. That's not how our communities, act to each other. We live with each other. We're in community with each other. There's lines of influence that go back and forth. And so we began to see, accounts starting up on Instagram and social media and those kinds of things that had to do with taking this narrative of Stop Asian Hate to the extreme of being belligerent and aggressive towards other folks. So we were there's this entire history of solidarity that goes all the way back that people don't get taught in schools, right? The reason that Asian Americans are even here is due to the civil rights struggle that resulted in the 14th Amendment and then establishes birthright citizenship. And that the civil rights movement is the context in which the Immigration and Nationality Act can get passed in 1965. So it's as a result of Black struggle that birthright citizenship gets established. So for us, it was AAPI Heritage Month is in May. And for us, the biggest symbols of solidarity is the friendship and the really kinship between Malcolm X and his family and Yuri Kochiyama and her family. And it continues even to this day, right? And so using that, we said, what we want to do is make a bunch of video shorts that would literally play about the same amount of time as one of these videos might play of an Asian American being beaten. And how do you flip the narrative of Stop AAPI Hate into something that's positive and creative and forward-looking? What we wanted to do was to move from this sort of defensive stance of just stopping AAPI hate, stopping racism, right? Mm-hmm. Stopping anti-Black racism and flipping it into we stand together in solidarity, and we always have, on a whole range of different types of issues. So we created 14 videos for Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month last year in May. We began airing them on May 19th, and we ran them all the way through the beginning of June. And they're now at a website called csunite.org/unite. And CS Unite was a project of the Asian American Foundation, which was literally about trying to advance and is about trying to advance Asian Americans in all aspects of U.S. life, and is about trying to talk about the coming together of folks. And if we can think about what that means, solidarity amongst us, then it leads us to think about solidarity with all communities, right? And particularly other communities who have been oppressed. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about that, we have to go to the heart of it, which is anti-indigeneity, anti-Black racism, right? And so by opening the door with these stories, we want to lead people down that particular path. And, in that way, the videos became sort of a statement, and we're really proud of them.
You talked a little bit about the narrative work with the May 19th project and writing a screenplay, and it definitely feels like you are doing more and more, film and television projects. And I wanted to ask you about the digital miniseries that came from another book you wrote called We Gonna Be All Right, directed by Bao Nguyen. And I was just curious, what was the process of adapting that book into serial form? And do you imagine there's more film and television work in your future?
Yeah, I do. So Bao and I met because a mutual friend of ours had introduced us because we were both working on Bruce Lee projects, and we just got to be fast friends. So we were like casting about, trying to figure out how we might be able to hang out more and work together. And we talked about taking this book and the essay format and adapting it into shorts. And so applied to Independent Lens, actually, and got funded to do a web series. And the way that we kind of took it was each of these will be episodes that they'll be pertaining to or influenced by chapters in the book, as opposed to sort of narrative nonfiction. And so we could get topical. And so each of them kind of evolve. Of course, the book is about resegregation and race relations. And there was a story in our backyard in East Palo Alto, which is a historically Black community that is increasingly being encroached upon by Facebook and Google, and tells the story of displacement and gentrification through the eyes of a friend of ours, or a friend of mine, I should say, this young rapper named Isaiah, who had literally been displaced out of East Palo Alto. And then the last one we knew we wanted to do on this essay that we called The In-Betweens, that was literally about Asian American identity, because the heart of the book is about Ferguson, the Ferguson movement. And at some point in the process, the editor told me, she's like, look, you're not Black, and yet you're writing about the importance of this particular movement. You have to disclose what you're about, where you're coming from. But it became this essay that was about sort of what does it mean to be in between this sort of North American paradigm of Black and white. And as we talked about this concept, we realized, actually, this applies to so many different types of things. That particular last essay became the last episode, which Val pushed us to make it really personal. Mm-hmm. And so my kids appear in it, and part of it's filmed in my house, which I never would have agreed to. That's like a personal space. But Bao was like, I have an idea of how we're going to do this, and so brought in Rafael Casal, who had been in Blind Spotting and is an amazing actor and screenwriter himself, and Linda Sarsour, right, the amazing, inspiring Muslim American organizer and activist, and brought them in to talk about what being in between meant to them. Mm-hmm. That rounded out kind of the series for us. Bao shot it in black and white. And in part, it was because the cover, which was by Damon Davis, amazing Missouri artist from East St. Louis, who's deeply, deeply engaged in the Ferguson movement. And he had taken pictures of folks who are in and around the Ferguson movement that served as our cover. And he'd done it in black and white. He was trying to show how, really, literally, this issue is in black and white. And the thing that Bao loved about that notion was this idea of, if we're going to do present day, then we should do it in black and white. And if we're going to do the past, then we'll do it in color. We'll render it in color. It was just a brilliant choice that he decided very early on that he wanted to do. And we had to pitch it to 1 million people. People are like, what are you, talking about? But yeah, it was pretty powerful. I'm really, really proud of the work that we did on that, and forever indebted to Bao to pull this story out of us, of me and the family, and to add that into the whole thing. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned the Bruce Lee book that you've been working on. Obviously, Bruce is such an important figure, but, you know, why are you working on this book? What does he mean to you? And yeah, can you talk about how long you've been working on it? Have there been any surprises, you know, things you didn't know about him that you thought you did and you've changed your mind? You know, if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Oh, there's so much. So the original project was brought to me by an Asian American editor many years ago. But fast forward to now, and the book project really took on a different kind of a meaning over the last 2 years under the pandemic because of all this anti-Asian violence. I think at some point in the process, it became really clear that what we needed, I say we, just me and my friends, my family, my close homies, whatever, needed was sort of a book to be able to kind of make sense of Bruce Lee as an Asian American. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, what we landed on, Rakia Clark and I landed on, was a book that is sort of a dual biography. So it's really interesting that Bruce Lee comes to international prominence at the same time that Asian Americans are naming themselves Asian American and making their presence known literally in U.S. history. Like they're intervening in U.S. history in the same period. There's a way in which you could retell Bruce's story that really opens up a way for folks who don't have a lot of Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders in their lives to understand us in a much better type of a way, right? And what's really interesting and weird is if you go back and you put him back into history and him walking through all of these different sorts of periods and geographies, the scope and magnitude of what he accomplished actually increases. It makes him even bigger than he is now. He grows up during a period of war in China. He comes of age where war has caused a mass migration, similar to the kind of thing that we're seeing in the Ukraine right now, a mass migration from mainland China into Hong Kong.
And he's born here, right?
He's born in San Francisco and he remigrates. So that's also like part of the Asian American and Pacific Islander experience, is this crossing of the Pacific, right? So all of that is part of his story too. And then he gets kicked out of Hong Kong pretty much by his parents because he's getting into too much trouble. And he has to start all over again as if he were an immigrant on the West Coast in Seattle, in the same area in which people like Jimi Hendrix are coming up. The counterculture is getting started. And so who is Bruce in this particular moment as an immigrant, as somebody who's facing racism now in the US? And also he's like seen as kind of a guru type of character because there's sort of this Oriental kind of fetish happening in the West Coast culture, as counterculture, right? So like Kung Fu becomes the way that he becomes sort of a guru in a way, right? And then he goes to Hollywood. He encounters Hollywood racism. And after years of trying to break through, he says, I can't do this anymore. I've got to go back to Hong Kong. So all of that, even before the Bruce Lee that we know, right, appears on the screen in the movies that we know, it's an epic story. So the book then is kind of trying to talk about all this against the backdrop too of Asian Americans naming themselves, of them launching these massive protests in colleges all across the country. And then by the time Bruce Lee actually passes away, he has done so much to be able to increase the presence and the sort of level of visibility of Asian Americans, just at the moment that Asian Americans are politically beginning to define themselves. So there's so much that can be told, and that's what I'm trying to do in this book.
We talked a little bit about Greg earlier, and you know, we've lost so many people over the last 2 years, many of whom, you know, are kindred spirits. Others are people that have been like intellectual now ancestors. And I know that Greg loomed very large in your life. He loomed large in mine. And what I love about his practice and is that he loved culture so much, you know, and it was so central to everything, particularly music. And I'm curious for you, what did you learn from him?
So much. I mean, again, like Greg was somebody who connected the dots from Black freedom culture to the Black freedom movement. Like there was no line between the two. But for me to follow his writing and literally take every article as a map, like we were talking about earlier, like this is a map for me. Let me trace down all of these names that he's talking about in this article about Public Enemy or Jean-Michel Basquiat or Afrofuturism. He was a person who literally was a guide for me, even before I ever met him, in terms of figuring out for myself what kind of path I wanted to be able to chart and coming into my sense of like, how do I see the world and how do I want to be in the world? And all this because he was like writing these incredible pieces about music that I loved in ways that just were as artful as the music that I was listening to, that we were all listening to, right? I think we all share that same story about Greg, actually, right? It's like, oh my God, like, here's the first piece I read from Greg. Like you just, you know, your mind's like blown open.
Yeah.
He was the one, man.
Yeah.
He was the one.
Who are other personal luminaries or intellectual North Stars in your life?
Wow, there's so many. I feel like I aspired to the clarity and just the style, the beauty of Greg. I aspired to the sort of clear-eyed analysis of people like, you know, actually Mike Davis and Angela Davis, both like for different reasons, you know, truth-telling in that particular moment at that particular point in my young formation. And then, you know, as you begin to write, like there's all of the people who are your peers who become your heroes as well, right? So, you know, Danielle still writes like a dream. Dream Hampton writes like a dream, right? Like Cheo Hadari Coker, for me, like taught me really how to interview people, you know, and all these folks I consider to be like friends and also mentors, you know. Davey looms huge in my life because he's everything. He's like a walking encyclopedia of stuff going all the way back to the Bronx. He's a master storyteller, and he's like taught me so much. Another person is this person who wrote the book Funk, a guy named Ricky Vincent, who really inducted me into thinking about things like on a massive type of scale. What is all this mothership connection stuff going on? Like, what is all of this stuff about? Like, there's so many people. Like, I could load up this for another 3 hours, but the beautiful thing about it is I've been able to live long enough and do enough work that I've been able to be engaged with them directly at different points. Yeah.
I have so much to say, but I won't. So what's next on the horizon? Is there anything that you haven't attempted professionally that you'd like to experience?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'd love to try to pull together another screenplay. And I'd love to try fiction, actually. It's sort of something that's always scared me. It's almost like the boundaries are too wide there. But I've been really inspired by so many of the writers now. There's sort of this wave right now. Obviously, we're like in a Black cultural renaissance. We've been in one for maybe a decade or more. You've been at the forefront of that, leading that. And I think that what that has done as well is it's helped to increase visibility for Asian Americans. And so we've seen this sort of outpouring, this sort of literary push that's kind of happened. Viet Thanh Nguyen or Ocean Vuong or Jin Lee, you know, Kathy Park Hong, you know, I could just go on and on and on. And that's been really inspiring to kind of see these stories being told. So I'm interested in telling stories that are rooted in Asian America and also rooted in Hawaii, and talk about the ways that we have been and are and hope to be. So that's the thing that I'd love to kind of crack open in this next decade of life, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My last question will be, how do you maintain hope? I feel like, organizing, when you talk about the music industry, fundraising, even the work for the Center for Cultural Power, all of that, there's an optimism that I imagine you have. One, to start new projects and to kind of keep going. And they also could be places that easily one's joy could be stolen. You know what I mean? That would have been very easy to do. And so, yeah, how do you maintain hope and continue to dream?
Because so many people are doing such great things, So one of the things I feel like the pandemic has kind of exposed to all of us is sort of the existentialism of aloneness, what it means to like live with ourselves, right? And that's caused people to make big decisions about their lives and to change the directions in which they're moving. A lot of us, right? A lot of our friends, a lot of our loved ones have gone through this. And what I think I relearned again and again was that even if we can't be in space together, breaking bread together, maybe we can now, maybe we're edging back into that now, we just so need each other. And that particular piece of it, looking at what people have done, what they've been able to achieve, what they hope for each other, that's the stuff that continues to give me hope. It's infectious, right? Like we talk about it as kind of inspiration, like inspiration being something that is internal to us, but it's really this thing of it being externalized. So for me in particular, I would say over the last, few years, reflecting on it, seeing, my niece and my cousins and other folks heading up to Mauna Kea, that's been powerful. That's made me want to explore more and more what it means for me to be Kanaka Maoli and to learn the language, to learn my Olelo. Like your work with BlackStar is incredible and like makes me want to write more. Y'all have lured me back, right? And so it's this thing of being able to share, continue to share. It's like the gift that keeps on giving.
That's beautiful. Thank you. That's it.
Ah! I feel totally dissected. I feel like, oh shit. I feel like I owe you money for a therapy session.
I'll discount it. $3.25 an hour.
Can I Venmo you right now? Like, what's going on? Like, this is wild.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I miss you.
I miss you too.
Yeah.
You're listening to Books by Johnny Chang, produced by Hunter Beats.
I just wanna make beats like how you write books. I just wanna make beats like how you write books. I just wanna make beats like how you write books. I just wanna make beats like how you write books.
To explore more of Jeff's work, visit his website, jeffchang.net. Follow him on Instagram and Twitter at Zentronics. Also visit seeusunite.org to learn about the May 19th project. This season of Mini Lumens is brought to you by the Open Society Foundations. It is produced by BlackStar Projects in partnership with Rowhome Productions. The host and executive producer of Mini Lumens is me, Maori Karmael Holmes. Our producer is Imani Leonard. Associate producers are Urit Reinheimer and Farah Rahaman. Managing producer is Alex Lewis. Executive editor is John Myers. Our music supervisor is David Little Dave Adams, BlackStar's Music and Cinema Fellow, supported by the Pop Culture Collaborative. Our theme song was composed by Vijay Mohan and remixed by David Little Dave Adams. Sending you light and see you next time.